This is an amazing and extremely important video. This will sound very strange, but the geomagnetic storm and the Quebec power outage in March of 1989 and the bomb cyclone exactly 30 years later in March of 2019 and the blackout in the Super Bowl in 2013 involving the San Francisco 49ers and the election of Pope Francis shortly after that, in March of 2013, are prophecies that is predicting that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan on April 13th, 2023, and there will be a massive evacuation of Manhattan Island. It is also likely that the official narrative in the mainstream media that will emerge regarding this event will somehow be a lie. And these prophecies are also predicting that on February 22nd, 2024, a solar flare coronal mass ejection from an explosion on the surface of the sun, a solar flare coronal mass ejection, will cause catastrophic power outages and blackouts, and will be a fulfillment of the first trumpet judgment described in Revelation chapter 8. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction was made ahead of time, as does this timestamped email and forensic notes PDF. If you are skeptical, please email me and I will forward these to you. As you can see in this email, this prediction was known since at least February 22nd. All right, this is an extremely profound diagram you are looking at. This will be an extremely profound video. We are talking about this prediction that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan on April 13th, 2023. That's a typo. This should be 23. As I will explain, this explosion is also a prophetic sign in a trail of signs that is leading to the upcoming predicted explosion on the surface of the sun, a solar flare coronal mass ejection that will cause catastrophic power outages and blackouts on Earth. And I will explain this and how it is actually a fulfillment of Revelation chapter 8. I'll explain that. And let's begin with this connection right here. This exact 7 times 7 months, which is 49 months, back from this predicted explosion in Manhattan, this dirty bomb, to the date of this bomb cyclone. This was a major weather event in the U.S., especially in the central U.S. and Colorado and Iowa. And for example, it reached record wind speeds in Colorado at 110 miles per hour. And this bomb cyclone had a record barometric low recording. And so this was a record low of barometric pressure. And the reason why this is prophetically significant, this record low in Colorado, this record low barometric pressure, is because it happened shortly after this Super Bowl, which was the record lowest score in Super Bowl history, with the score of 3-13. And this bomb cyclone with its record low barometric pressure occurred on the date 3/13. In other words, this was designed by God. This Super Bowl here is a second witness confirmation of the prophetic significance of this bomb cyclone, which is in turn, as I will explain, predicting the bomb explosion in Manhattan, which is in turn part of the trail that's leading to the explosion on the surface of the sun. And so this second witness here of this Super Bowl is an example of how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, and that's what makes it true and not a product of one's imagination. And what makes what is being explained on this channel different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. As the Bible says, second and third witnesses are required to confirm a matter. And that's what this record lowest score in Super Bowl history is. It's a second witness confirmation to the record low barometric pressure in Colorado. Now, the reason why God pointed to Colorado here specifically is because it is the highest state. Denver, Colorado is the highest major city in the U.S., which is why Barack Obama had his Democrat National Convention in Denver, Colorado, because the word Bama means high place in Hebrew. Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven, and the name Barack Obama in Hebrew means lightning from heaven. Barak means lightning. Bama is the word for high place, which in the Bible is a metaphor for heaven. For example, it is said that Lucifer fell from the high place, a metaphor for heaven, in Isaiah chapter 14. And in the language Jesus would have spoken, Aramaic, the word from is O. And so Barack Obama is lightning from heaven. Either Jesus didn't know what he was saying when he said this, or he knew that there would be a famous president named Barack Obama and said this anyway, knowing that it would confuse us, or he was revealing the identity of the Antichrist. Obviously, the latter option is the only one that makes any sense. And the reason for the record wind speed of 110 miles per hour is because on 9/11, the Twin Towers that collapsed were 110 stories high. And 9/11 was the big judgment warning for America to repent or else judgment destruction, which is described in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 10 through 11. And in every daily Bible reading, including the ones for Catholics, it's standard. The Bible divided into 365-day readings. The reading every September 11th includes Isaiah 9, verse 10 through 11. And so what I'm going to do now is spend just a couple of minutes with a clip that I've already made that explains how this Super Bowl here was a 9/11 sign. It's extremely relevant for this video, as you will see in a minute. And so let's just explain this amazing, truly amazing Super Bowl prophetic sign. Tom Brady and the Patriots in 2019 against the Rams. Before the walls of security collapsed on the ancient city of Jericho, the Hebrews blew ram's horns, and then the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment. The Hebrews were led by Joshua, who, as recorded in the Bible, died at the age of 110. On 9/11 in 2001, it was 110 stories of the Twin Towers that collapsed. The two uprights of field goal posts symbolize the two towers on 9/11 that were rammed by two planes that were flights destined for Los Angeles, the home of the Los Angeles Rams. The two towers were rammed 17 minutes apart. The Rams lost the Super Bowl in 2002, just a few months after 9/11, after Tom Brady, in the final minute of the game, took the Patriots from their 17-yard line to kick a field goal and break the 17-17 tie, which hinted at the two planes that rammed the two towers 17 minutes apart just a few months earlier. 17 years later, with 17 Super Bowl records to his name, Tom Brady entered a second Super Bowl against the Rams. Beginning with the Rams-Patriots Super Bowl just after 9/11, Brady has been in 9 of the 11 Super Bowls the Patriots have been in. In this year's Super Bowl, with the score at 3-13, which hinted at the date 3/13, March 13th, the Rams kicker missed an extra point, something that very rarely happens. Earlier in the playoffs, this Rams kicker kicked the game-winning field goal with 4 seconds left in the game to end Tom Brady's career. It was the Rams kicker's second game-winning field goal kicked late in the game against Tom Brady and his former team that had rejected him. It will be explained later how this symbolized the two planes that rammed the two towers on 9/11. In the book of Joshua, Joshua led the Hebrews around the security walls of the ancient city of Jericho 7 times over 7 days, while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets before they sounded the trumpet one last long trumpet blast before the security walls collapsed in judgment. This was 3 sets of 7. Joshua, who led the Hebrews around the walls of security of ancient Jericho before they collapsed, died at the age of 110. On 9/11, the twin towers that collapsed were 110 stories high. In Super Bowl 54, the Kansas City Chiefs were in the Super Bowl for the first time in literally 50 years, and the main story of the game was how the quarterback and the Chiefs caught fire at the end of the game in their come-from-behind victory and scored 3 touchdowns, which is 7 points each, with just under 7 minutes remaining in the game, which gave us another clear 3 sets of 7. And also another 50 years connection. In Super Bowl 53 in 2019, the winning team only scored 1 touchdown, which is 7 points, and this touchdown came exactly with 7 minutes and 0 seconds remaining in the game. And the only other time a winning Super Bowl team only scored 1 touchdown was literally 50 years before this. This connection was a main story after the game, and this gave us 3 sets of 7 and another 50 years connection. The 3 sets of 7 here is the 7 points that was scored at exactly 7.00 seconds remaining in the game, and this was exactly 50 years after the only other Super Bowl in Super Bowl history in which the winning team only scored 7 points, which is a 3 sets of 7. Tom Brady is the most famous quarterback of our time. Arguably, the other most famous quarterback in history is Joe Namath. Joe Namath's nickname is Broadway Joe because of his many appearances in the 1970s and 80s in television, movies, and even Broadway. Although heavy underdogs in the days leading up to the Super Bowl in 1969, Joe Namath famously predicted that his team, the New York Jets, would win the Super Bowl. Both Joe Namath and Tom Brady wear jersey number 12. Tom Brady was never supposed to be a starting quarterback, but Brady got his chance 12 days after 9/11 when the Patriots' star starting quarterback was injured in a game against the New York Jets. A Jets linebacker hit the Patriots' starting quarterback hard in his side. The following week, Brady was the starting quarterback for the Patriots in a game against the Colts. The Patriots scored 44 points. After Brady's stunning performance in his first game as a starter against the Colts, the rest of his career is history. GOAT is Antichrist symbolism. And the first game that the GOAT of football, Tom Brady, greatest of all time, started in was against the Colts. And he scored 44 points, which identified the 44th president as the GOAT Antichrist. The New York Jets and the Baltimore Colts were the 2 teams that played each other in the Joe Namath 1969 Super Bowl. New York Jets quarterback Joe Namath wore jersey number 12. Tom Brady, player number 12, began his career 12 days after 9/11 in 2001 against the New York Jets, and then he played the Colts. On the prophetic 50th anniversary of the 1969 Super Bowl between the Jets and the Colts, Joe Namath was in attendance at the 2019 Super Bowl. Just like Namath's team in 1969, the Patriots won the Super Bowl with only scoring 1 touchdown. These were the only 2 Super Bowls in history in which the winning team only scored 1 touchdown. And this touchdown score of 7 points was made with exactly 7 minutes remaining on the clock. In other words, God's purpose of all of these connections was to point to the beginning of the career of Tom Brady, player 12, against the New York Jets, and the hard hit on the side of the quarterback by the New York Jets linebacker 12 days after two jets that were flights from New England, the home of the Patriots, hit hard the side of the two towers in New York. Now, as was just explained, this Super Bowl was all about this record low score in which the winning team only scored one touchdown, which is 7 points, and it was scored at exactly 7 minutes remaining in the game, exactly 50 years after the only other time the winning team scored only one touchdown, 7 points. That was a 3 sets of 7. In the book of Joshua, Joshua led the Hebrews around the walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho 7 times over 7 days, and then on the 7th day, 7 priests blew 7 trumpets, and then the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment. This was a prophetic 3 sets of 7, which is what God has been using in his big picture of signs frequently. There are also 3 sets of 7 in the account of Noah's flood, the flood judgment. Another association with 3 sets of 7 and judgment. So this is clearly, it's a 3 sets of 7 in itself, but this 7, this record lowest score with only one touchdown scored at 7 minutes, this gives us a 7, which confirms this 7 times 7. Because the 3 sets of 7, this 7 times 7 months, the 3 sets of 7 in Joshua is in fact a 7 and then a 7 times 7. They marched around on the 7th day 7 times, while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets. And also in the Omer count, between Passover and Pentecost, it is also a 7 followed by a 7 times 7. It is a 3 sets of 7, but it is also a 7 followed by a 7 times 7. After Pentecost, 7 days to the Feast of First Fruits, followed by, on the day after, 7 times 7 days to the Feast of Pentecost. And so this bomb cyclone follows this sign, as I've explained. The two are connected, as I've explained. And this is a 7, and it's followed by a 7 times 7 to get us to the prediction of the dirty bomb in Manhattan. And so that's why the bomb cyclone as well. Now, Manhattan is the location of the 9/11 judgment warning, where the 110 stories collapsed. Joshua died at the age of 110. That's why the Twin Towers were 110 stories and then they collapsed, because Joshua, who died at 110, led the Hebrews around the walls of security before they collapsed. And this upcoming predicted dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan will be, if you will, the follow-up judgment to the promise or warning of judgment, destruction, that were the 9/11 events. Another thing about this Super Bowl is that it identifies the Antichrist. And by the way, I explained this in other videos. But this date, because I don't want to get off too much onto a rabbit trail explaining this, but that's how the big picture of science works and why it's very, very difficult to explain it, because when you attempt to explain one part of the web, which is an interconnected web, you end up pulling the entire web. And it just goes off into infinity because it's not linear, it's 3-dimensional. But anyway, this was the goat versus ram Super Bowl, which hints at Daniel chapter 8, which is about a battle between a goat and a ram. Goat, greatest of all time, Tom Brady, played the Rams. And in that prophecy, there is a period of 2,300 days, and exactly 2,300 days back from this date 2-3, which hints at 23, was the 23rd anniversary of the 1989 World Series earthquake in the San Francisco Bay Area. And on that 23rd anniversary, a huge fireball flew over the San Francisco Bay Area at low altitude. And Genesis 1:14 tells us that the lights in the sky are for prophetic signs. And on, actually. So there's a lot, and I've explained it before, so I won't explain it again. But this Super Bowl is all about the number 23, and it includes sets of 2 and 3 within the Super Bowl. And also, for that matter, one of the reasons why 23 is prophetic is because it hints at 2 and 3. Because Jesus said in the Gospel of Mark that before the rooster would crow twice, Peter would deny him 3 times. It says it like that. It says it in that order. Before the rooster would crow twice, Peter would deny him 3 times. And this is symbolism for the Antichrist as well, because taking the mark of the Antichrist will be tantamount to denying Jesus, and following the Antichrist will be tantamount to denying Jesus. Also, the score, 3 to 13, hints at 3 divided by 13, which equals 0.230. And so that's another confirmation. This all, by the way, identifies the Antichrist. That's the point. The basketball president who wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. And so that is the point. And Daniel chapter 8, which is involving the 2300 days, is about the Antichrist. Now, the Antichrist is a type of king, the Antichrist king, a ruler. And in the Bible, 30 years is symbolism for a king. Joseph and David were made kings at the age of 30 years old, rulers at the age of 30 years old. And so that's why God uses 30 years connections in his signs as being prophetically significant. And also the GOAT, greatest of all time, of football is king symbolism too. He's the king of football, if you will, which is why this 30 years connects to this Tom Brady GOAT Super Bowl. And this is a weather event. And this connects to this space weather event, this geomagnetic storm, this famous geomagnetic storm that occurred on this date 3/13 in 1989. And this storm triggered the massive power outage in Quebec. So the geomagnetic storm hit, and because of its vulnerability on the Canadian Shield and the Rock, the James Bay Power utility went out within 90 seconds, and it was the second big power outage in Quebec within 11 months. That is a clear combining or pairing of 9 and 11. And pairing numbers is the simplest way for God to provide second and third witnesses that confirm matters. For example, this is in fact a pairing as well. It's a pairing of two 23s, because 3 divided by 13 is 23. But God pairs 9 and 11, of course, to hint at the 9/11 judgment warning sign. And so the power utility going out within 90 seconds of the storm, and the second power outage within 11 months, major one, and it lasted for 9 hours. So that's another confirmation, a second witness of the second witness. So it was 9 hours it lasted, and it hit 90 seconds after the storm, which was the second one in 11 months. It affected power in the U.S. as well, and caused, for example, the power to go out at the the Toronto Stock Exchange, and it revealed the vulnerability of power utilities to a event such as the equivalent to the Carrington event in 1859. And that's also why it was prophetic. It was a big wake-up call, this event. And it had this 9/11 symbolism. And again, it's all pointing to, well, the 9/11 Super Bowl, first of all, because it's, after this, 30 years exactly. And then the dirty bomb in Manhattan. And then, ultimately, this prophetic sun explosion, the predicted sun explosion, which will fulfill Revelation chapter 8, verse 7, the beginning of the first trumpet of the 7 trumpets in Revelation chapter 8. And it is predicted that this upcoming explosion on the sun will be devastating because of the power outages that it will cause. And likewise, this magnetic storm here, this geomagnetic storm in 1989, is all about this historic Quebec power outage. And that's why this is astounding and why this is a very important video. What I've just demonstrated to you is a clear, very simple trail of signs that is leading from the geomagnetic storm from the sun in 1989 to the big one in 2024. Okay? One thing I forgot to mention, or now is a good time to mention, is as I was mentioning, in the Omer count from Passover to Pentecost, it is a 7 followed by a 7 times 7. Pentecost is symbolism for the church. And Pentecost literally means 50. And this storm here, the following morning, caused a tornado right at where the Great American Eclipse, the path of totality of the Great American Eclipse peaked, the one in 2017. It peaked right over the center of the country, over an area of the country nicknamed Little Egypt, including southwest Kentucky, where on the 14th in the morning, but it was part of the same storm. This storm was overnight, and by the way, it caused thousands of people to be stranded at the Denver airport, the highest place, which was more high place symbolism, furthermore, because it's airplanes. And furthermore, the Antichrist will rise to power through a plane crash, the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash, which is predicted to be on June 30th. Arguably, this is a sign in the trail of signs that is leading to Kamala Harris's death in a plane crash. I forget, but there is a trail of signs from these signs to June 30th. I could make another video about that. But that's why the significance of the airport in the story, because that was a big part of the story, is how thousands of passengers were stranded inside the Denver airport all night. Into the next morning, when this tornado ripped the roof off a church, Mount Zion Church in West Paducah, Kentucky, which is right where the eclipse peaked in the path of totality. The 17-mile wide path of totality, by the way, which could arguably another 7, followed by a 7 times 7. But what's interesting about that is that this date, March 14th, 2019, was part of a trail of signs that was parallel with the timing of events in the book of Joshua. And again, Joshua died at 110. That climaxed with Pentecost in 2019, when symbolically the walls of Jericho collapsed in God's judgment. In other words, in 2018 and 2019, and arguably also, and well, yes, 2020 as well, but a different sort, God demonstrated parallels of prophetic signs that, trails of prophetic signs that paralleled the timing of events in the book of Joshua. That's explained in other videos. I won't explain it. The point why I'm saying this is that this sign here that occurred with the roof being blown off of the church led to Pentecost, which again symbolizes the church. The big story of this was that inside this church in that morning, there were 40 preschoolers and 10 teachers, 10 adults, that were inside the church as the roof was being ripped off completely. They got themselves into the inner room, which is symbolic of the temple, the inner sanctuary, and they sang songs like "Jesus loves me" as the tornado ripped the roof off of the church building, and it was 50 people, and this again led to Pentecost, which means 50th, and Pentecost symbolizes the church. And 50 people were inside this church. This was a massive judgment warning sign for the church, because as Peter said, judgment begins with the church. And God is very, very displeased with the American church. And that includes evangelicals, and arguably especially evangelicals, if we go by God's prophetic signs. Jesus reproves whom he loves, and he has clearly demonstrated that the American evangelical church, specifically the evangelical church, is the church of Laodicea that thinks it is in need of nothing and does not realize that it is blind and poor and pitiable and naked, as Jesus said in Revelation chapter 3, which is why you would think that the roof was torn off and the people inside were exposed. It was a warning. And this was one of a number of church roof warning signs. Church roof destruction warning signs. For example, the only building that was damaged and burned on fire in the 7.0 magnitude earthquake in the 49th state, 7 times 7, was a church in Anchorage, Alaska. Anchorage symbolizes Jesus and the church. It was the church roof that burned because of the downed power line. Speaking of power outages, and church roof destruction signs are symbolic and point to Pentecost, because on Pentecost, the disciples were in the upper room waiting for the Holy Spirit and the tongues of fire. And so that's also why the fire in the roof sign. But roof destruction signs in themselves are hinting at the upper room on Pentecost, which symbolizes the church. That's just one of many. Everyone's familiar with, of course, the Notre Dame roof fire, the 9-hour roof fire, because 9 is the most important number in God's big picture of signs. From the Bible, it symbolizes God's judgment, and on and on. And what you need to do is watch the 23 church signs video, arguably on this channel, the most important video on this channel. Make sure you watch the 23 church signs video. And what I am saying is that this was a church judgment warning sign on the American church. Okay. And that's why also 7 times 7 months from this, from the church that was in the 70-mile wide path of totality of the eclipse judgment warning sign. Also, as I just mentioned, this roof that was torn off of the church in Kentucky in the path of totality of the Great American Eclipse, it was part of a trail of signs that was leading to Pentecost in 2019 that was a parallel with the timing of events in the book of Joshua. And on that Pentecost, we received one prophetic sign that caused me to need to go for a long walk after it was discovered. There was a rare 3.2 magnitude earthquake in Jericho, in Washington State, and I explained that in other videos. But that was quite something because the walls of security collapsed on Jericho due to an earthquake, and we were expecting such a sign, and then there was this rare earthquake in Jericho. It's amazing beyond words. But the other thing too is that because one of the themes of this video is blackouts, power outages, this was the day of the massive power outage in Argentina. 44 million people without power, almost the entire nation. And that was on Pentecost, and there was another Catholic church sign, the Notre Dame opened for the first time, I believe, on that day. But anyway, that was on Pentecost, and Pentecost literally means 50th day. And 50 days after this 44 million power outage in Argentina was the day of the power outage in Indonesia, where the 44th president grew up for 4 years and there were 4 deaths. And it was the 44th president's birthday in that power outage. And these two power outages are separated by 50 days, and it begins at Pentecost, which means 50 days. And these two locations, Argentina and Indonesia, are the two places that symbolize where the two antichrists are from, or they are the places where the two antichrists are from, which points to the two antichrists. The first and second antichrist described in Revelation chapter 13, the first one being the first in chronological order of the two blackouts, Pope Francis, and the second, who gets his power from the first, who speaks like a dragon, Barack Obama. And that's also why that's also why 44 million in the power outage in Argentina. But that was worth bringing up here because this theme and one of the themes in this video is power outages. Also on that same day as the 4 deaths it was Jakarta, Indonesia, by the way, which is where the 44th president grew up for 4 years. But also on that same day, it was also the 44th president's birthday. And the same day, there was a mass shooting, which was perhaps arguably a little bit bigger of a deal back then than it is these days. But there were 9 deaths and 17 injured, which also identified Barack Obama, who was president from 2009 until 2017. And also first arrived in Washington, D.C. as the senator from Illinois during the 109th Congress, lived on 109th Street while studying at Columbia University, and will return as the president in the District of Columbia due to the shenanigans that brought in the president in the 117th Congress. The day before, on August 3rd, 2019, was the day of the 23 deaths and 23 injured in the El Paso shooting. The basketball president wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. All right, now, one last thing here is that this predicted dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan, which will cause a mass evacuation of Manhattan Island, will be exactly 45 months after the extremely prophetic Manhattan blackout, which I have made an amazing video explaining. It's about an hour. It's one of the most important videos regarding the prediction for the explosion in Manhattan. Make sure you watch it. And as I explained in that video, during the Manhattan blackout was Manhattanhenge, this event that occurs in Manhattan only twice per year when the sun sets directly within the canyon walls of the grid of Manhattan. And again, in Genesis 1:14, it says that the lights in the sky are for prophetic signs, first and foremost, before day and night and seasons. It says that they are for prophetic signs, and the sun is the brightest light in the sky. And so we have this Manhattanhenge prophetic sign during the Manhattan blackout. In other words, it was an emphasis of Manhattanhenge. In other words, the Manhattan blackout pointed to Manhattanhenge. The Manhattan blackout pointed to Manhattanhenge in order to point to the upcoming catastrophic solar flare explosion on the surface of the sun that will cause catastrophic power outages and blackouts. And it's exactly 45 months. Now, 45 months, well, first, the 45th president is from Manhattan. But 45 is prophetic because it's the 9th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 9th row is 45. And as I just explained, the most important number in God's signs is the number 9, as it symbolizes God's judgment. Also, 45 is a multiple of 9. And also, 45 hints at 4 plus 5 equals 9. And 45, the 45th presidency was a big trumpet warning. Trump in archaic English, it means trumpet. Trump's presidency, the 45th presidency, was one big trumpet from God, a trumpeting from God of judgment and destruction of America and the Antichrist, who will skip the 45th presidency. The 44th president will soon be president again. I believe that will be in November this year. And so that's why 45. Now, from here, from this, and again, the 45th president is from Manhattan, from this prediction for the Manhattan dirty bomb and evacuation, it will be exactly 45 weeks to the date it is predicted that there will be a catastrophic explosion on the surface of the sun. And this event, this catastrophic solar flare explosion on the surface of the sun, is predicted to occur on the date 2/22, February 22nd, and the reciprocal of 45, which is 1 divided by 45, is 0.22222 into infinity. And so the number 45, in other words, hints at a series of 2s. And that's why it is exactly 45 weeks to this date 222 from this momentous prediction event that is predicted to occur in Manhattan, this dirty bomb explosion. So that's 45, again, relevant for everything that I just explained, but it's also confirmed as a second witness to this, because this is a sun event. And so we have 45 months followed by exactly 45 months, followed exactly by 45 weeks to the sun event. And so these this 45 months and 45 weeks are second witnesses to each other. All right, now, 45 weeks is also 315 days. This is relevant because God's end times number is 2,520, and divisors of 2,520 are prophetic in God's signs. 2,500, and this is a number from Bible prophecy, by the way. 2,520, it's, by the way, it's 7 biblical years. Biblical years made up of 12 months of 30 days each. So anyway, 2,520 divided by 315 is 8. Okay, these are the two divisors, 315 and 8. And through this, God is pointing to Revelation chapter 8, which is what as I explained, the first trumpet judgment is this, what's being described in Revelation chapter 8 is an explosion from the surface of the sun, a solar flare coronal mass ejection. And that's why this 45 weeks is 315 days, because it hints at 2,520 divided by 315 equals 8, as in Revelation chapter 8. And so there you have astounding beyond words, big picture here of these sun prophetic signs. These are huge. You need to watch the Manhattan Blackout video. This is huge, and this one is big too. And not only are they sun prophetic signs, but they're also power outage prophetic signs, blackout prophetic signs, sun and blackout prophetic signs. And it connects with exactly 30 years to this weather event as well, from the high place. The sun is the high place as well. And this is an amazing beyond words, a big picture that's leading to not only this prediction of the dirty bomb in Manhattan, but also this prediction of the explosion on the surface of the sun that will cause catastrophic power outage blackouts. All right, one thing that arguably I forgot or was missing from the original diagram here, one last connection here, which is astounding as well, is that exactly 3 years before this Super Bowl was this Super Bowl. Correction, not 3 years, 6 years, exactly 6 years. And it was on the same date. And as I explained earlier, this date of 2-3 was prophetic because it hinted at the number 23, which again reveals the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23. And so it's exactly 6 years because the Super Bowl is on a Sunday, and so they aren't always on the exact date, same date, but this is, and it's exactly 6 years, which is hinting at the Antichrist, whose number in Bible prophecy is 666. And that is also, there's more witnesses to the fact that that's relevant in this Super Bowl, which I'll explain. But this Super Bowl is another second witness to the relevancy of this connection is that both of these Super Bowls were played in stadiums named Mercedes-Benz. The stadium in this one was in Atlanta, this one was in New Orleans, but both of them just happened to be the named Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Okay, now this Super Bowl is known as the Blackout Super Bowl because just after the second half got going of the game, there was a 34-minute blackout. And that blackout occurred immediately after. And by the way, they never really figured out the cause of that blackout, and that in the mechanics, the engineering of the electricity in the stadium, and that's because it was done by God. But anyway, the blackout occurred immediately following the longest kickoff return in history. So the second half began with a kickoff, and that kickoff was returned for a touchdown, and then the blackout happened. And that blackout was the longest kickoff return in history, Super Bowl history. It was a 108 yards. It might even be longest in all of history because you can't even get much longer than 108 yards. The only more yardage you could have is 109 because the end zone plus the field is 110 yards. So it's 108 yards was the kickoff return, and that's because it was prophetic, and that's when the blackout happened. The reason why that's prophetic is because 108 is a multiple of 9, and it adds up to 9. 1 plus 8 equals 9. And again, the number 9 is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. And again, the date hints at the number 23, and God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together to confirm the signs and connections. The basketball president wore jersey 23 and became president in 2009, and that's just scratching the surface of why God pairs 9 and 23 together, but I've explained it so many other times in other videos, I won't explain it again. But again, that's how God confirms his signs with second and third witnesses, and so it's a pairing of 9 and 23. This big event of the game was involving the number 9, and it was on the date 23. That hints at 23. Also, 108 yards hints at the number 18. And God uses the number 18 to hint at 6 plus 6 plus 6, which hints at 666, the number of the Antichrist. And the 18th prime number is 61, and the Antichrist was born in 1961, and on and on. And so that's another reason for the 108 yards. This Super Bowl was also nicknamed not only the Blackout Bowl, but it has another nickname, the Har Bowl. And that's because it was the first time ever that the two coaches were brothers, Jim and John Harbaugh. Also, the coaching assistant of one of the coaches was the son of the other coach, was the nephew of the coach and the son of the other coach. And the reason for that is because one of the teams in the Super Bowl was from San Francisco, and that identifies the other Antichrist, Pope Francis. God uses San Francisco to point to Pope Francis. And this connection gets us to this record Super Bowl score of 3-13, which in fact is properly said 13-3. And that hints at Revelation 13:3, which identifies the Antichrist as Pope Francis. That's a prophecy in the Bible, one of many, many that clearly and indisputably reveal that the Pope is the Antichrist. It talks about the mortal wound that was healed, and the mortal wound of the Catholic Church was when Napoleon stripped the Catholic Church in Rome of its temporal powers. And in the end times, the Vatican and Rome will have political temporal powers again as well, and not only spiritual powers over their adherents, the Catholics. Anyway, and so that's what's being described in Revelation chapter 13:3. But so San Francisco. Now, the reason for the Harbaugh coincidence of the two coaches being brothers is because this hints at the coincidence of the San Francisco Bay Area earthquake, which was one of the biggest judgment warning signs of all. I have said in the past, in the league of 9/11, but I have to take that back, and nothing is in the league of 9/11, but it is up there. The San Francisco Bay earthquake judgment sign, the World Series earthquake in 1989. And the coincidence is that the two teams in the World Series were both from the San Francisco Bay Area, just across the bridge, the Bay Bridge from each other, San Francisco and Oakland. And the World Series earthquake just happened to occur right as Game 3 got started in the opening of the broadcast. And so that's the coincidence. And if it weren't for that coincidence, there would have been many hundreds or maybe thousands more deaths, because it occurred and during rush hour, but because of the World Series, most people in the San Francisco Bay Area were in front of a television set and not on the highway. And so, okay, so that's the coincidence, and that's what the Harbaugh coincidence is hinting at because of the team San Francisco. But what's important here is that this Harbaugh Bowl was also the Blackout Bowl, and the big thing about the Harbaugh Bowl, Blackout Bowl, is the blackout, and the broadcast of the Super Bowl, which is the biggest broadcast of the year, was about a blackout. And there was a blackout in the broadcast booth. And it's actually known for the jokes that went on after one of the broadcasters made jokes about there being a conspiracy to pull the electricity, pull the plug. But that's relevant because the 1989 World Series earthquake is all about the broadcast and the power outage in the broadcast booth as the game broadcast began. The opening of the broadcast, 4 minutes into the broadcast, was when the power went out in the broadcast booth as the world was watching another championship game, the World Series, just like the Super Bowl. And the world, the nation is watching, and then the power goes out in the broadcast booth, and then we learn that it was because of an earthquake. And that's what this power outage in this broadcast of the Super Bowl is pointing to. Again, it's pointing to the judgment warning that was the 1989 World Series earthquake. And through what I'm explaining here, it's pointing to these other things that are about to happen. And also, as I have explained, or will be explaining some more, It's pointing to Pope Francis because God uses San Francisco to point to Pope Francis, the first Antichrist. The other thing about this Super Bowl was the quarterback, Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick is an extremely prophetic figure in God's signs, one of many and arguably the first men named Nick that God is using to point to the Nicolaitan doctrine and works that Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war on with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. And he has clearly identified through his big picture of signs, which is only being explained on this channel, that the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day is Reformed theology, Calvinism, free grace, what comes into packages of dispensationalism, and a sovereign grace comes in the package of Calvinism. And this is also other doctrines related to this, or they are that doctrine. It's the same doctrine. Once saved, always saved. The myth of imputed righteousness as evangelicals understand it. Our righteousness is as filthy rags, one verse that Luther took out of context and twisted to develop his whole theology. And all Christians will be raptured, etc., etc. The Nicolaitan doctrine of our day. Make sure you watch the 23 church signs video. Anyway, Colin Kaepernick is prophetic for that reason, but also he kneeled. He began the kneeling protests, which ended up with the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, and the peak of which was when the church, the historic church across from the White House, St. John's Church, was burned on Pentecost. And Pentecost is symbolized by fire, and Pentecost symbolizes the church. And the day after, President Trump, the 45th president, the arguably peak of his presidency prophetically, when he walked across Lafayette Square, and the protesters were parted, not due to anything other than God. Trump didn't have the protesters separated. It just happened. And anyway, he stood in front of the church and held up the Bible upside down, which pointed to judgment on the church. And that was, and this 45th president was doing that exactly 45 months after Colin Kaepernick kneeled for the first time. But I explain more about this in the other video, the Obama returns video, which is, like I said earlier, the most important prediction for the Dirty Bomb video, arguably. All right, and so, and the protesters kneeled for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and that's because the first plane struck the North Tower on 9/11 at 8:46 a.m., and the kneeling is symbolism for kneeling to Satan and the Antichrist. It is Antichrist. Colin Kaepernick is Antichrist. That's why he played for San Francisco. The Pope is the Antichrist. And 6 hints at 666, but also 6 years is exactly 72 months. And that's prophetic because it is a multiple of 9, and 7 plus 2 equals 9. The most important number that symbolizes God's judgment. Actually, one more thing. Colin Kaepernick wore the jersey number 7, and this connects to this Super Bowl that's all about the number 7, which connects to this, which is exactly 7 times 7 months, to the date it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan. And one last thing to summarize here is that this is a blackout bowl, and we are talking about this prediction for the dirty bomb in Manhattan being part of a trail of signs that's leading to the prediction of the sun explosion, the explosion on the surface of the sun, which, by the way, will be the corona of the sun. And in Manhattan was the peak of coronavirus. The prophetic signs of coronavirus were focused on Manhattan and New York City. And on the day of the sun explosion will cause catastrophic blackouts. And so, in other words, the blackout bowl is a prophetic sign that's part of a very amazing, astounding, simple trail of signs that's leading to the blackouts that will be caused by the explosion on the surface of the sun. One more thing also is that player 7, after the blackout, player 7, Colin Kaepernick, he led his team to score 17 unanswered points. In other words, the Super Bowl is known for this stretch in which the 49ers came back strong, scoring 17 points unanswered. And the number 17 is the seventh prime number. And in the blackout, firefighters had to rescue people from elevator number 7. All of the other elevators were fine. That's astounding. God pointed to that elevator. That is also because Pope Francis, because we're talking about San Francisco, Pope Francis was stuck in an elevator and was 7 minutes late for Mass. Pope Francis was 7 minutes late for Mass because he was stuck in an elevator due to a power outage at the Vatican on September 1st, 2019. By the way, that was exactly 3 years after Colin Kaepernick kneeled for the first time. And 3 years is 36 months, which is hinting at 666, because 36 is 6 times 6, but also 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And the 36th triangular number is 666. The last number in a triangle of numbers in the 36th row is 666. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way up to 36 equals 666. And so from the day that the San Francisco quarterback kneeled for the first time, player number 7, it is exactly 36 months to the day that Pope Francis was stuck in an elevator for 7 minutes. And that was the same day that 7 people died in the flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon National Park in southwest Kenya, the same region of Kenya that Barack Obama was born. All right, so as I've just explained, this blackout bull involving the San Francisco 49ers. And by the way, I need to add that the blackout bull involving the 49ers connects to the bomb cyclone, which is 49 months exactly to the prediction of the dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan. But this blackout bull was 38 days to the date that Pope Francis was elected. And again, the blackout bull with the 49ers, San Francisco, is pointing to the Antichrist, or is God using it to point to the Antichrist, Pope Francis. That's why San Francisco, and the connections that I just explained, involving, for example, the power outage at the Vatican when Francis was stuck in the elevator. Okay, so it is 38 days from that blackout bull involving the San Francisco 49ers to the day that Pope Francis was elected. And this is relevant because it hints at 3 plus 8 equals 11. And it would be relevant on its own because they are very close to each other. It's the time of the arrival of Francis. But it's more precise than just that also, because 3 plus 8 equals 11, or hints at 11. And, for example, it was 9 days before Barack Obama, the second Antichrist, was in Jerusalem with his extremely Antichrist prophetic sign, which was the day that he was forced to drive through the Jerusalem wall of security after a freak sandstorm emerged out of Saudi Arabia, the home of the spiritual enemy, grounding his helicopter, forcing him to take a vehicle, a limousine, through the Jerusalem border wall of security in order to get to Bethlehem. And so he was in Bethlehem on this day as well. The Antichrist was the abomination that's spoken about in Revelation chapter 12. I'm not saying it's a literal fulfillment of it, but it's a type for it. It's a partial fulfillment of it when the Antichrist visited the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem. And furthermore, the word abomination hints at Obama nation. But anyway, the point here is that it was 9 days, this prophetic event. One thing too, by the way, this was exactly 50 months, and the number 50 symbolizes the church, as I explained already in this video. Pentecost symbolizes the church, and Pentecost literally means 50th. And so it's exactly 50 months before Trump was the first sitting president to visit the Western Wall. 50 months exactly after Obama was forced to drive through the Jerusalem wall of security. And of course, the Antichrist in Bible prophecy will be in Jerusalem in the name of peace, and will be the Antichrist. He'll be persecuting God's people. It's the biggest transgression in Bible prophecy is when the world will seek to divide Israel and make it an international city, and Obama will be the leader of that effort and movement and organization through the United Nations. Anyway, so that's why the Jerusalem security wall, and then Trump visited the Western Wall, the Temple Mount, and Bible prophecy talks about the Antichrist being on the Temple Mount. The Western Wall being the last remaining wall of the Temple Mount complex. All right, now, the day after, Barack Obama was in Petra, Jordan, which is hinting at Revelation chapter 12, when the dragon tries to drown with a flash flood God's people in Petra, Jordan. It doesn't say Petra, but many people believe that when it says that the woman will be hiding in the wilderness, that it is talking about Jews that are hiding in Petra, Jordan, after the abomination in Jerusalem that's set up by the Antichrist. So anyway, that was the day after, on March 23rd, and exactly 50 months after that was the day that President Trump visited Pope Francis at the Vatican. And it was in the news how Trump made a comment regarding the Vatican wall. Trump, I forget what he said exactly, but he said something to the effect that, I wish America could have a wall like the Vatican has a wall, because Trump's presidency is synonymous with his border wall of security, which is hinting at the trumpets that were blown before the walls of security were collapsed in God's judgment on the ancient city of Jericho. Okay, so that was 9 days, and that is a pairing of 11 and 9. As I said earlier, God pairs numbers together to confirm the signs and connections, and in this case, point to 9/11. But what further confirms that are these further connections involving the number 11 and the number 9. So 9 years exactly after Pope Francis was elected was this date here, March 13th, 2022. And by the way, again, 3 divided by 13 equals 0.230. And so that becomes a pairing of 9 and 23. As I mentioned earlier, God pairs 9 and 23 together to confirm the signs and connections. But this was the day of the prophetic explosions, the 12 rockets that exploded just outside of the U.S. consulate in Iraq, and the Russian rockets that exploded at the U.S. base in Ukraine at the Polish border. And so these were judgment signs from God for America. They involved America, the U.S., these explosions, and as I'm saying, it connects to the predicted explosion in Manhattan. But on this day, the GOAT, greatest of all time, the 44-year-old GOAT of football, announced with a tweet that he would return for a 23rd season. And this was the same day that the GOAT Antichrist, Barack Obama, announced with a tweet that he had COVID 23 days before he returned to the White House for the first time for the anniversary of his nationalized health care. You can do the math, you can make your own conclusion as to the connection between COVID and his return to the White House for nationalized health care, which hints at the mark of the Antichrist, if you know what I mean. And you should know what I mean. So anyway, goat is Antichrist symbolism, and that connects with this goat, the first goat, the first Antichrist, and his election. This is exactly 9 years to these Antichrist signs, okay? Which is in turn exactly 13 months to the date it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan and there'll be a mass evacuation from Manhattan Island. 13 is a number that also symbolizes the Antichrist because in the Bible, the Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews, was the 13th generation from Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 2 13th days of the month. And the two Antichrists are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. Well, anyway, God pairs 9 and 13 together, and one reason is because it symbolizes judgment. Number 9 symbolizes judgment. 13 symbolizes the Antichrist. And so 9 times 13 symbolizes judgment by the Antichrist. 9 times 13 is 117. The shenanigans that brought the president into power during the 117th Congress will replace himself with the Antichrist, Barack Obama. But also, 117 symbolizes Rome, and Rome symbolizes the Antichrist. And Bible prophecy makes that very clear. For example, in Daniel chapter 9, when it talks about the Romans and the future Antichrist being the leader of the Romans. That's very clear, by the way. And that's one of many passages in the Bible that are undeniably pointing to the Antichrist as the Pope. Somehow in the last couple of decades, Protestants have lost that knowledge, but there wouldn't have been a Protestant Reformation without that knowledge, that the Pope is the Antichrist. But we've lost that knowledge as a whole, as a church, conveniently right before the end times begins. And that's by design, so that many people will fall for the Antichrist. But anyway, the reason why 117 symbolizes Rome is because the maximum expansion of Rome, the Roman Empire, Rome stopped expanding in the year 117 AD. That is like the year for the Roman Empire. There was a transition of emperors, and the emperor that became emperor in 117 AD halted expansion, decided that the policy would be to no longer expand. That was 117 AD, and that isn't a coincidence. And that's why we have this amazing 9 years and 13 months connection. It's astounding. From the election of Pope Francis in Rome. That's amazing beyond words. And like I'm saying, whatever is going to happen as a result of this dirty bomb, it will solidify power for the antichrists. Okay? Because, well, just speculation, it isn't speculation. It is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran in the next month on May 17th and then bomb Damascus on May 20th. And Pope Francis, a big thing about him is that he's big on anti-nuclear weapons. And so that isn't a coincidence either. So that somehow, and the dirty bomb will be nuclear material. That's what a dirty bomb is. Conventional explosive with nuclear material. And so that's where this is headed, okay? So that's why the 9 and 13, because the antichrists will solidify and rise to power through the events that are coming in the next couple of months. Now, this date here, as a second witness to this trail of 9 years and 13 months, this is the equivalent of 11 times 11 months, 121 months. And that's a second witness to this connection, this trail here. And as I said, second witnesses confirm the matter. 11 times 11 months pairs with the number 9. And it also pairs with this 11 and this 9 right here. This 9 days, this 9 years, and then this 11 here. And so there you have it. That's astounding and proof that the Pope and Obama are the first and second antichrists. It does kind of matter. Some might disagree, but it does matter which order we get them in. So many people think that Pope Francis, they still play the guessing game, which is ridiculous, because Bible prophecy is very clear regarding the identity of the Antichrist. But most evangelicals believe a false interpretation of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, which says that the identity of the Antichrist isn't possibly able to be known until the supposed Holy Spirit is removed. But 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 isn't talking about the Holy Spirit. And furthermore, the reason why Paul was cryptic and talked about the thing that was holding back the Antichrist as being a what and a he is because he needed to not speak plainly, because had he been mentioning Rome and the Pope and the Bishop of Rome, it would have gotten the holders of that letter into trouble. So he spoke cryptically, but he also said that they knew what he was talking about. And why would he speak cryptically if he's talking about the Holy Spirit? The he and the what that he's talking about in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, because why would the Holy Spirit be a he and a what? The he and the what that he's referring to is Rome and the emperor of Rome. When he moved the capital of the Roman Empire to Constantinople, Emperor Constantine, who made Christianity the official religion of Rome. And so anyway, that's the he and the what. And when the emperor moved the capital out of Rome, it allowed the bishops of Rome to rise and assert their power, leading ultimately to popes. And so that's what he's talking about there. And so anyway, there you have it. And when we have wisdom and understanding through having knowledge of the Bible and knowledge of God and his plan, we can clearly see that one of the biggest events in European history, which was the moving of the capital from Rome to Constantinople, was for the purpose of bringing about ultimately the Antichrist, so that the bishops could rise to power. And one other comment here too is that anyone that talks about the Pope possibly not being the Antichrist because they're playing the guessing game still, because they don't believe the identity is possibly known because of their interpretation of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, etc., it demonstrates their lack of wisdom and understanding of Christianity and history, because and that's partly why Protestants will be deceived by Pope Francis as the Antichrist. They don't see him as a threat because they've lost wisdom and understanding about what Christianity is. And but it's very clear that the worst thing that ever happened to Christianity was Rome converting to Christianity. Constantine was the worst thing that in history that happened to the church. Was the official make of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is apostate. It isn't a legitimate denomination of Christianity, and that's the problem. Many Protestants have lost their knowledge and understanding regarding this, and they don't understand that Catholicism isn't a legitimate denomination of Christianity. It's pagan religion wrapped to appear as Christianity. And everyone should know that, including Catholics. But also one of the problems with Catholicism is that it's like McDonald's for the masses. You know, it's like the whole thing about Christianity was making everyone part of the church, and they devised ways to make that happen, including incorporating the pagan traditions that people were doing. And you can still do those pagan worshiping, but let's be Christian and make it Christian, etc. So that was the way, and also their heretical additional doctrines such as the worship of Mary and purgatory that facilitate the bringing in of all of the masses into the church, so that ultimately they can establish a church hierarchy of a man-centered religion with a man at the top and a pyramid of hierarchical order of authority within the church. And you've got to confess your sins to the man and take the piece of bread from the man, and you got to donate your money to the church ultimately, right? So that's why they were incentivized to bring in the masses, and everyone in the entire nation becomes a Christian then. That's Catholicism, right? But that isn't the Bible. The Bible, the holy people, the set-apart people are a peculiar people. They're not the masses. That's why it's like McDonald's. It's like the lowest, quality product that the most amount of people will appreciate for the lowest cost. That's the business model of McDonald's. Well, that's the same kind of thing with the Catholic Church. And so anyway, people should know that. Any Christian with the Holy Spirit should be able to look at the Catholic Church and easily discern that this is evil and God absolutely hates Catholicism and it is apostate. I'm not saying God hates Catholics or all Catholics. There'll be some Catholics that are, of course, will be saved, but that's in spite of their Catholicism, not because of it, okay? In the most important video on this channel, which is titled God's Purpose for These Predictions, I will explain the reason for why God has given me a voice through this prediction that is from God. You are making a very grave and serious error if you think you already know how I was able to know this prediction, and more importantly, if you think you already know why I was able to know this prediction. it would be very foolish for you to skip watching this most important video. You will have missed the point of this prediction. One of the purposes for this prediction is to establish that the main conclusions being stated in this video are fact. That is the purpose for this prediction. Therefore, there is no debate regarding the information that I will be presenting. If there were to continue to be a debate on the information I will be presenting, there is no purpose for the prediction. In other words, the information is controversial, but that is the reason for the prediction, to end the controversy. It is a serious warning for those that disagree with the things being stated in this video. And to not appreciate this is to miss entirely the point of this prediction that is from God, and it is to miss the point of this video and video channel. This is how prophecy works. This is how God proves things. This is why 1/3 of the Bible is prophecy, in order to prove that it is the Word of God. Jesus said to those that doubted him, if they didn't believe what he had said, then they should believe the works. They should believe the healings and miracles that Jesus did. In the description box below, I will leave a link to the video titled God's Purpose for These Predictions.